All right. So, yeah, today we are talking about having a clearly defined vision and why that's important before you can really start to create and build your life. Obviously, last podcast we talked about, consuming information and teachings, books, content, anything really that can help you get where you want to go. But, we kind of started a little bit out of order just because we wanted to talk about different things. But the precursor to that, before we know, okay, what do I want to study, what do I want to you know build, what do I want to create with my life, is like we got to clearly define that. And I think for it's interesting, a lot of times we learn something and it seems like, so I don't know if you feel this way, but it seems so like, well, duh, like in your face, like very, very self-explanatory, very basic. But it's the people that actually take the time to do the stuff, and actually, like, even if something like this sounds hokey, or like what we're going to talk about as far as practical application sounds hokey, like it's really the people that do it, right? You hear about people waking up every morning, they take a blank sheet of paper and they just write down their goals. It sounds super hokey, but guess what happens is, like, the repetition of doing that over and over and over again, what that does to your brain is it starts to tell and signal to your brain, this is important to us. Let's try to look for things in our day-to-day life, in our everyday dealings with people, communication. Let's look for opportunities to make this become a reality, right? And
Absolutely.
it's so crazy. I mean, I'm just as guilty as the next guy, as of hearing something and being like, oh, that's a good idea, I agree with that, but then not actually doing anything to do it on my own. And or you do it once. I've done this before too, where it's like I do something like this, write out a clearly defined vision for my life of what I want to create, and then and then don't do it for a long time. So it's hard for my brain to keep it top of mind, especially when you start getting the outside influences of the world to bombard you with all the different things that are trying to distract us from what we're doing. And so this is definitely a routine that needs to be baked in, I feel like, at the beginning of most everyone's life, when they want to make that transition from just kind of going with the flow to taking control of their life, to further it in whatever areas they're wanting to further it in.
All right, man. I gotta ask you. So, what was your initial profound vision? What was the feeling? What was the thought? How did you see it? What was the timeline you expected to achieve it by? Maybe what were some weird things that almost seemed out of your control, but were tossed into your journey to almost make this turn out to what it wanted to be?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think another thing that I've learned too is that visions, although the core foundation of them should for the most part stay the same, they're also allowed to evolve and change, I think. And especially as you begin to achieve, you know more and more, I think you should reset the goal. I think for anybody that knows who Jesse Itzler is, he was a young guy. He was a white rapper, out of college. He had gone to school for business and then ended up rapping, got a record deal. And he says, his main goal when he was a young rapper was to get a record deal. And he finally got a record deal. And he said he made the biggest mistake that most entrepreneurs or people really make, is they achieve something and then they forget to reset the goal, reset the vision, and re-describe the new levels. And so then when he had got his record deal, he kind of let his foot off the gas and ended up getting dropped by his record label. And then he was kind of back to square one. But then for those who know the story, he went on to found a company called NetJets, which was basically like the Uber for private jets. And he was a super young kid. I mean, he was selling contracts to people like Jennifer Lopez, just big name celebrities, athletes, LeBron James, Matt Damon, an actor I know that he's mentioned before, just tons of people, and he's a young, he's between yours and I's age, and he ended up selling that company to Berkshire Hathaway, which is Warren Buffett's investment firm. for over $1 billion, I think. So it's important to have your vision evolve. And so to answer your question, I think when starting out, the important thing for me learning early on, and it's funny because I still have to remind myself to keep doing this, is to think irrationally large, to think that there's just there's no limit to what I can achieve or what I can create in my lifetime, because we, again, going back to our external world, is just bombarded with negativity and limiting beliefs and stuff. And this is something that you and I talk about all the time off camera, is like the limiting beliefs of like what goes on in our heads and why we tell the inner voice that just tells us that we can't do something because it's impractical or whatever it is, right? And we've convinced ourselves at times to just not play too big, right, for whatever reason. And so I think that's important, is the question to ask yourself is like, why not me, right? We talk about how this whole channel, this whole movement that we're creating is goats and unicorns, studying the greatest individuals and companies of all time and what they've done to achieve what they've achieved, and then model our behaviors and our actions and our belief patterns, and then the tactics and strategies, model, not copy, but model what they've done to achieve that success. And that's it's a really good formula for success and achieving what you want to achieve. And so Kobe Bryant is one of those goats, right? He's in the GOAT conversation for best basketball players of all time. And he used to he when he came into the league, he talks about this, how like Michael Jordan was, who a lot of us consider to be the GOAT of basketball. Michael Jordan was he called him his big brother, right? So Kobe was like 18 years old when he entered the NBA, and Michael was in towards the tail end of his career, and he was, Kobe talks about how people would call him Black Jesus and stuff. And it's just like, what in the world? People would idolize this dude. And he just looked at my MJ as like, if he can do it, why can't I? Now that's what eventually evolved into what we know now as the Mamba mentality, or the Mamba mindset of Kobe Bryant, is that mentality of just like looking at other people that are successful and realizing the only difference between us and them is that they are just a little bit ahead of us and they did the work. That's it, right? When it comes to things like sports and things of that nature, that there may be some genetics involved, but all in all, like that's for the most part, that's even false, right? There are people that have been told that they could never walk again, or they'd never be able to do XYZ or whatever. And how many times has the person, how many times has the person that was told something got proven wrong, or proved that person wrong by saying,
And elaborate on that a little bit. What do you think is like the thing that allowed them to persevere when they're told they can't do this or that? Like, what is the core of that?
That's a good question. I think really it's just that self-belief of just knowing that, like, that nobody is inherently special, right? That nobody is inherently like, do not let the thought in your mind ever enter that like they were just born a natural blank or whatever. Like, especially when it comes to business. Like, yes, there are some people that were born into wealth or inherited some wealth, but they are such an anomaly that you cannot make a decision based off of somebody like that. You know what I mean? It's it's so stupid that we would ever think in our own minds that, like, because someone has achieved something else, that means we can't, right? Like, and that's what our brains try to tell us to do, right? And that's what a lot of this mindset and psychology work, at least for these first two portions of the unicorn equation that we talk about, is so important, is the mindset and psychology and behind human behaviors, because our brains, like we've talked about, I think in last episode, was they're wired for survival. So we're not wired to be optimistic creatures and think, oh, if they can do it, I can too. We're bound to try to just survive, right? Just don't get out of your comfort zone too much. And that's why we see people that achieve extraordinary results. They are the ones that are constantly pushing their minds and and controlling their minds instead of letting their minds control them, and saying, no, I am going to do something great. I am going to do something big with my life. And that's honestly the essence of this entire thing that we're creating with Goats and Unicorns is, I'm still in the process. I by no means am light years ahead, coming back and saying, oh, I've achieved all this, multi-million dollar, billion-dollar net worth or anything. No, it's like I'm going that direction. I may be a couple of chapters ahead of people, but nothing crazy. And I'm bringing, what I've learned along, and I'm learning from other successful people along the way. Right. So, yeah, I think when it really comes down to the core of telling yourself that other people aren't special, it's just a matter of having what we're talking about, that clear vision of like, you know, of what it is exactly that we're trying to create. I think if you have the clear vision, there's going to be days where you believe in it and there's going to be days where you don't believe in it. But the difference is that if you have the clear vision, you can reread it. This happens to me all the time where I start to get bombarded with just life, whether it's kids, whether it's, work, whether it's coaching, whatever it is, I get bombarded and sometimes I lose sight of that vision. And then I'll sometimes find myself in a place where, the dreams of the vision and everything that I have for my life, they get dampened, they get lost. And that's when I need to go back and revisit them. And the more frequently that I go back and revisit it, preferably, daily, the most successful times I've found in my life is when I'm doing it daily. Then that's when, my brain is constantly in creation mode and not like, you know, survival mode, I guess, or
Absolutely.
I don't know what I would call it, maybe scarcity minded, something along those lines.
Fitting in.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Anti-ostracism.
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of what I think is the key, if you will, to not giving into those thoughts that, someone is more special than you are, is
Oh,
to
that's
just
a great opinion.
have that clear vision and revisit it often.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's like your biggest competition slash enemy is that little voice in your mind. You know what I mean?
Oh, big
Um,
time.
there's this. I'm a pretty big quote guy. You're gonna hear me say quotes all the time. There's this one cool quote, and I think it was sourced from like Africa or something, where it's like, if there's no enemy within, the enemy outside can do you no harm. And that pretty much just means, you're the only thing you ever got to deal with and struggle with is just that voice in your mind because it just creates all this turmoil that's not even really there. But it's really bizarre. And this is something, I'm pretty sure you've read Think and Grow Rich. You've probably checked out Limitless too by Chris Crone.
Yep.
The whole idea of like what you think about, you attract is really hard to pinpoint, but so many people have tried it and they swear by it. So it's really just
Yeah.
something you gotta try for yourself. But yeah, just those thoughts you have, just to like, touch back up on what you're saying, what you think about and how you have like these thoughts that come in and might, go against what you want to achieve for that vision.
Right.
Just really important, it's you just really got to put more energy into what you want. It's just like a muscle. See, this is kind of stuff that's like harder to really like prove, but you just got to try it. Your brain is just like a muscle, even with the certain emotions, If you're trying to like achieve something, say like, you want to be wealthy. Okay, you want to be wealthy. How do you get wealthy? How? Okay, maybe real estate. You found out some cool stuff on real estate. Okay, how do you get into real estate? Okay, you're gonna need some money. How are you gonna like, leverage your time to get more money? Okay, now you figured out maybe some type of side hustle. What
Right.
type, just break it down step by
Right.
step. And the entire time you're gonna get criticism from the outside world, especially your own mind. Those are the
Right.
worst things. Sometimes you wake up and you're irritated, you gotta tie your shoe. But you just gotta
Yeah.
freaking keep going, keep asking, the little questions, and you're going to get to a starting point. You're going to
Right.
find somewhere, and it's going to be like, oh my gosh, I got this entire journey ahead of me. I see where I want to be. I can see it vividly in my mind. It makes me feel great, but I'm here. You
Right.
know what I mean? And it's
Yeah.
like, okay, I just got to have total faith within myself that these things are just going to play out. If this doesn't work, move on to the next, and that's just vision. But along the way, like with the second step of the unicorn equation, you got to constantly be absorbing information.
Yep.
Like your vision is typically like I don't want to say that for everybody, but for me, my vision is my purpose.
Yeah.
Your purpose isn't supposed to be a walk in the park, man. Your purpose is supposed to define who you are by the end of it, and
Right.
to that character.
Yeah,
So
100%. And the we've or for you and for those who are new to this channel, I don't know if I've shared this on the channel yet, but um the the success triangle that I call it, there's three parts to achieving success in whatever area that it is that you're trying to achieve success in. And the first one is beliefs, the second one is actions, and the third one is tactics and strategies, right?
right,
And a lot of times I think, and when I learned to put all three of these together in different areas of my life, that's when things started to move in the right direction for me, and things got with income, with my relationships as a father, health wise as well. Even though I'm not necessarily the most healthy fit guy out there, but I have been very unhealthy at points, and and moving in the right direction because I've started to break things down. So when we're talking about vision, right, you've got what you said was very important to the action side of things, right? Is where like actually breaking it down and planning once you have the vision, in order to have a successful like vision and creating something, right? Like we need to have the beliefs, which is what we've been talking about with like the Kobe Bryant, like if they can do it, I can do it too. And ever and be ever expounding on that belief, right? And be irrational with it. Howard Schultz is the guy that founded Starbucks. He talks about dreaming bigger than people think is rational, right? Ed Milet is a guy I've talked about before with you. He says, your vision needs to be so big that the visions of each individual person of your organization or whoever it is that you're leading can fit with inside that vision. So let's look at that on the family level. If two parents have a vision for what they want the family to look like, then and each of those kids or whoever has a vision for what they want to do with their life, like you have coherence and you have harmony when the parents' vision for what those kids can do, those kids can see their visions coming about with how big their parents think. Now, why do we see a lot of kids sometimes saying, not necessarily like slandering their parents' name or anything, but they say like, oh, my parents weren't like this? It's because the parents didn't have a big enough vision. The kids' vision was a lot bigger than that, right? You run into this. Let's look now at an organization. You've got the CEOs and the founders and the C-suite executives. And if their vision for where they're taking the company, if any one of those employees or key pieces of the organization have a vision that is much larger, that's usually when one of them leaves and goes and starts their own thing because the vision wasn't big enough. So there's literally like, what's the downside to having a bigger vision, right? People think, oh, well, if you're impractical and you don't, if you shoot for the sun or the moon and you come up short, but it's like you still achieve greatness and everybody's still pushing, right? Like it's crazy how many people just think small. Grant Cardone's a guy that we talk about a lot in this space. His whole 10x movement, right, is why not 10x it and then 10x that and then 10x that and then 10x that. And a lot of his is very numerical based with like your income and everything like that, but it's also massive action, right? Like why not 10x your action to get 10x the results? And that's really, the belief side of things is when you sit down to actually do this. And then, like you said, the action steps of plan out the actions that it's going to require. Like you just said, like, well, I want to create wealth investing in real estate. Well, then how do I get money to invest in real estate? I either need to raise it from somebody else. I need to learn how to do no money down, or I need to figure out a way that I can generate enough cash flow to dump money into real estate, right? Whether that's, in a sales job. For me, that was in sales for a long time. Then I transitioned into marketing. Now it's marketing, and now I'm using this money to invest into other stuff, right? And that was all part of a vision of the past, right? Of sitting down and writing it out. And then you have the tactics and strategies, right? And sometimes you don't know the tactics and strategies, and that's where the consuming and creating comes in from the second part of the unicorn equation. And that's how you end up getting that triangle of success where you've got all three sides to that. And that's when you start seeing success show up in your life. And people think it's like this law of manifestation or the law of attraction or whatever, which is real. But this is the reason why it's real, right? It is because this is what's going on behind the scenes. If we were to peel back the curtain, it's somebody is having belief and they're creating it in their mind first. And then they're planning out and being diligent and disciplined with the action steps it needs. And they found or are in the process of finding the correct tactics to bring it about, right? And I see this all the time. And it's interesting once you start to see these frameworks and put them into place for yourself. I'm sure you can probably agree, you start to see it in a lot of other areas. I know you and I have been texting back and forth where you're like, dude, my whole paradigm is shifting, my whole mindset is shifting because of XYZ, right? And that's exactly why, is because we start to connect the dots with the way just energy and everything, is transferred from human to human, from matter to matter and stuff. And it's really, as you talk about sometimes, like, not to get too metaphysical, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's exactly what's going on behind the scenes kind of in the universe to bring about the vision, right? And a major, like, this is coming up with the vision and starting with it is the number one thing. So with doing that is because if your brain doesn't know what to create, I mean, how else are we going to tell it, what we want to do, So yeah, pretty wild.
Yeah, just like I really, really like Chris Crohn's book Limitless. Not to,
Oh no, it's great. It's
I'm
perfect
gonna,
for
I'm gonna
it's
talk
per,
about it. It's great. I'm gonna talk
no, it's
about it.
perfect. Yeah, it's perfect
You
for this kind of stuff.
people, they all freaking loved it. I'm gonna talk about it.
Yeah.
There's this one part, and I really try not to get we're gonna try to stick to the stuff that's like super applicable, because the metaphysical side of things, that's a little hard. But there is
Right.
one point where he's like, your part is to do the what and why, and the universe, or however you want to label it, is the when and how.
Hmm.
And it's really, really bizarre, really cool, bizarre, not bizarre in a bad way, how it
Mhm.
works out. Because, for me, um, 4 or 5 months ago or so, maybe like 4 months ago, I was just sitting in my room and I was just like, I don't even think I've read this book yet, but I was just like, I'm gonna just try to retire in 6 months. Just like, I don't know if it's going to happen, and that's one thing
Yeah.
that's talked about in this book, is like the law of uh, gestation. Like, you could set a plan and it might not always land right when you want to do it.
Yeah.
But if you just set the plan, you start seeing these opportunities
Yep.
come your way that you might not even like look to put energy towards if you didn't think about it and really
Yeah.
believe in it. But it hit me so hard that day when I wanted to do it. And I don't know if I'm just like overwhelmingly enthusiastic sometimes, but I got like high on the feeling, total body high. I was like jittery. I was excited. I was like talking my fiance's ear off. I didn't know
Yeah.
what I was going to do. But it's just really cool because, just 4 months ago, like, if I were to look where I am right now, like, I'm on a podcast with Zach, and he's a
Yeah.
freaking, and like, I just like, opportunities are landing my way, and it's just, it's such a really good feeling, just, you just got to give it a shot. But when I did it, I just said, let's just see what happens. What if I just totally believe it's going to happen for 6 months? What's the worst thing that's going to happen?
Yeah.
What's the price to everything?
Exactly. And yeah. So I'll get into sharing a couple of stories. First one's from my life where we're talking about the vision, but it's also, again, going back to the whole, the beliefs and seeing it in your mind first and believing that it can be done, and then planning out the action steps, even if you don't know the entire plan, right? A lot of times a company is started thinking, yeah, I want to be the next unicorn, right? The next billion-dollar company. And they have no idea how they're going to get from, 0 to 1 million, 1 to 10, 10 to 100, 100 to a billion, right? They have no idea. And they might, you know, try their best, but they just start, right? They believe it can happen and they just start, and then things start to just happen, right? Things just to start to fall their way. And the other thing too that I want to make a quick note on is this doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen quickly. It happens as fast as it can, or as much as you get out of your own way and let whatever we talk about, the universe, your subconscious mind build, because a lot of times we get in our own ways by then we start to achieve a little bit of success. And I think we might have talked about this last week with the whole thermostat concept, where like, if your thermostat is set at 75 degrees, you start to heat up to 90 degrees, 95, 100 degrees. And then the limiting beliefs come in and you don't believe you're worthy of the success you're having. Well, then your thermostat's going to kick on and your thermostat's going to cool your life back down to where you're comfortable with. Right. And so there's a lot of work that goes in after having the vision. But one story that I have is a few years ago, I had this idea for an app. I've always really loved like technology. I don't know how to code whatsoever. And I know that just being in the venture world, that, tech companies usually cost a decent amount of money to have some sort of a prototype built out and coded and stuff. And so, it was funny. I had the vision for what I wanted it to look like. I had it like sketched out and everything, and I had it kind of created in my mind. I had zero clue how I was going to do it, because I, again, don't know how to code an app or anything like that. And then all of a sudden, I just decided to get on the phone with a app development agency and just get pricing. Like, I just wanted to see, okay, how much really would this cost me? And we talked about it, and they gave me the first, kind of quote, and they're like, yeah, the first step would probably be about, it was like 6 or 7 grand or something. I was like, well, I don't have 6 or 7 grand right now, but at least now I know what I need to figure out. Then I ended up renting an office space right around the time I actually started doing lead gen a few years ago. And I ended up renting out an office space. And in that office space, just in passing one day, I met a guy, and we just get to talking. And really crazy, this guy is here on a student visa from Peru. When I lived in South America, I actually met his brother. How random is that? And also, he was an app developer. He was working an internship for Google.
Oh man, that's so cool.
I know, and you think like, oh, that could be a coincidence or
I
whatever, but
resonate with that so much.
yeah,
That's
no, and it's what we've fooled ourselves into thinking that would be a coincidence, but really what it was the fact that I started taking action on how to get this app built. And then all of a sudden this guy shows up into my life, and he ended up being, the guy that ended up building the entire app, out and stuff. And this will actually be a story that we'll come back to when we talk on other parts of the unicorn equation. But that's an example. I remember going for a walk with a couple of buddies, that we just went for a walk. We were just chatting, catching up on life or whatever. And, that I started telling him this story about how, I just kind of put it out there that I was going to start building this app, having no idea how to do it, having no idea how to code myself or whatever. I just started taking any step, right? It didn't matter that it was a good step, a bad step, or whatever, just any sort of step in the right direction towards the vision. And then you start to see things, come in. And that's the most important part, I think. And that's why it's so important to start with this, and why, I'm trying to teach, people this, whether it's, in our lead generation program or in any other sort of business. I have a buddy who wants to start a CBD shop or whatever. And, he had no idea where to start or anything like that. So I just sat down with him, and I was like, okay, like, what's the vision? Like, what have you learned so far, and what have you implemented so far, and where are the gaps there, and so on and so forth. And we just started like planning it out. And he's like, at the end of it, it was like maybe an hour or two that we were doing that. We just had a whiteboard out, and we were just scribbling some stuff out. He's like, dude, I literally already feel so much more clear on how you do this, because I've been sitting here thinking I've got this idea, have no idea where to start. And most of the time, because we don't know where to start, that's when our limiting beliefs are just like, yeah, you're just procrastinate and just don't do it, And that's a small example of how important it is to start with the vision and get it as clearly descriptive as possible, and then just take one step in the right direction. And then that's when you start to see, even if it's minuscule momentum, it's still momentum in the right direction. So, yeah, that's one story from my life. I have another one that I've heard before on this stuff, but yeah, I didn't know if you had anything else that you wanted to add to that.
Just to throw it in there, it doesn't really tie in so much with the story, but just because we keep saying the word vision, okay. as far as I can explain it, because I don't want to like keep throwing out the word vision. Maybe for somebody out there who listened to this, was
Yeah.
like, what are they talking about? Manifesting vision. Vision
Yeah.
is so much like I just got sent a message. It has a lot to do with your imagination.
Yeah.
You know, like where do I want to be? Where is like if I could be anywhere at any place at any time, well, a practical time, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
what would it look like? Okay, maybe a beautiful beach, how do
Yeah.
it's just that's what vision is. It's really just using your imagination.
Yeah.
Imagination is totally overlooked, man. That stuff, it's literally the secret behind every single thing humanity has ever done.
Yeah, it's like what we would say is like, yeah, like your imagination, your mind's eye, like what do you see, in the future creating and everything. So what I wanted to kind of segue into was some practical actual steps and also some stories that I've heard of people doing this as well, so that it's not just like something that worked for Zach, but this is like a repeatable process that a lot of people have done, right? And a couple of ways that I've found to do a vision is, first of all, you might have categories. So you might have something financial related, career related, which career and finances can be separate, right? Finances can be on the wealth building side of things. Career could be a business that you're building, or if you're an employee, like what you want that to look like. Family, spirituality, emotional intelligence, right? Your emotions, your mental health, which is extremely important this day and age, your physical health. There's a lot of different categories, and really a good way to do this is to actually just get out a piece of paper, whether it's a lined piece of paper and you're writing out sentences, or if you're more of like a drawing type person, you can even just get a blank sheet of paper and draw out, like, I don't know, a path or something that you kind of want to see the sequence of your life to go in. And you can do this a couple of different ways. And I think doing a couple of different scenarios is important. So the first one is to write out your obituary, which sounds really weird. And it is a bit weird to think about. But if you write out your obituary and what legacy you want to leave behind on the earth, like you're gone, you're dead, right? Like what are people going to say about you at your funeral? What do you want said about you, right? And it sounds a little bit conceited, like maybe a little bit prideful, but it's really one of the most eye-opening things that you can do, because you actually sit there and think, what do I want people to say about me? And it's not in the sense of like, caring so much about what people are going to say or think about you, but it's more of like, it's like a personal thing. Like, this is what I want to be said about me. It's like, I was the type of person that, always helped out a homeless guy on the side of the road, or always, if somebody needed me day or night, like I would drop everything I was doing and I would go and help them. I want to be known as the person that brought life into every room that I was in. I want to be known as the leader that got people to believe in themselves so that they could then create the life they wanted to create, whatever it is, right? Those are kind of a few of, as you can tell, a few of my things that I would like to be said about me, not in the, because once I'm gone, I'm gone, not in the vainness of like, oh, I want to leave this hotty toddy, like, oh, Zach was this great guy. No, but genuinely, like, I want that to be said about the life that I lived, because if I know how I want the ending to happen, I can reverse engineer that backwards and have that top of mind and be living in accordance with that vision, right? That's the vision for the end of the life, right? And you can work backwards. And then you can also do this on a micro scale, and you can actually sit down and write out, like, what does a perfect day look like in my life? Like, in an ideal world, if money was no issue, I could spend the day doing whatever it was that I wanted. What would that look like? Would it be, sitting by the pool? Would it be inviting family over? Would it be helping some sort of charitable organization? Would it be running a big business and providing a lot of jobs? And these are all super noble things. You can also choose like selfish-ish stuff too. Like, if you're like, right, getting in my Lamborghini and driving down to, I don't know, go play some golf with some buddies. Like, I don't know. Like, there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. It's like, your vision is your vision. And but again, getting it as descriptive as possible. So writing out your perfect day, what does that look like? And then obviously, okay, so now I've talked about the obituary on one end of the spectrum, and then your perfect day. You can also look, create a vision for, 3 years from now, this is what I want my life to look like. 5 years from now, this is what I want it to look like. And you can do it however you want, really. But at the end of the day, by taking the time to actually think about it and then almost play like devil's advocate, as far as like, why couldn't I go bigger? Why couldn't I do more? Pushing yourself to start to think bigger than you've ever thought before, that you think is even practical, that sounds irrational to every other person, but pushing yourself to think bigger and bigger and bigger until you start to get those feelings, that emotion going on in your body where it's like, holy moly, like I could do this, that like, why not me? Right. And then you get to that point when you've pushed yourself on your vision to create an even bigger vision. And that's when you really start getting into the fun stuff, I think, because it's like, in the back, or you think in the back of your head, you're like, I don't think this is possible, but I also do think it's possible. It's like this really weird dichotomy. And that is, we won't go too deep into it, but that's where you really start breaking some of the deep things going on in our brains that are holding you back. Right. And that's when we get into the, kind of like what you were talking about with like the limitless Chris Crone work, right? Is like finding those deep rooted reasons, like that we've made up, these stories that we're telling ourselves of why we can't achieve that vision, breaking them, moving forward, and then breaking them all along the way, because then that's what ultimately, leads to creating that vision and actually having it in your life. It's crazy, and I'm also speaking of from a point of view of someone who's on the path, who has seen it happen in the early stages of my vision, but my vision is so much larger than what I've achieved up until this point. It's just that I'm still in the process, right? I'm not, I'm 27. I'm not at the end of at the end of my life, or anything like that. So anyways, just kind of some interesting things there. I've got some other stories
No,
I
no,
could share on the
great.
matter, but yeah.
And just like you were saying, how like your vision's going to change. When I first read Rich Dad Poor Dad, the very beginning of my financial outlook, didn't even have vision after that, but I was just like, let's just try to get wealthy. Why not?
Yeah.
My vision has been rewritten probably a dozen times, and the
Yeah.
first few were a lot harder than the last few.
Yeah.
It's like I'm actually just thinking about this right now that we're having this conversation, but
Yeah.
tell me if you disagree, but I really feel like, when people say I want to be the best version of me,
Uh-huh.
it could start off with like, your daily habits without any vision, and you will turn into, a refined person. But I really like, I don't know, I just had a gut feeling thinking about this. I really feel like to be the best version, the glorious feeling at the end of, your life, so to say, is to chase your vision. Even if you achieve it or don't, I feel like that journey. I might have talked about this a second ago. Pardon me if I did. But, it's just like when you start these things, the entrepreneur roller coaster. That's a
Yeah.
great book because he talks about, you're going to get on this roller coaster
Hmm.
and you're going to start to experience all these different angles, whether it's you, your inner circle, even outside your circle. There's going to be all these things telling you this and that, but there's only you in here who's really chasing that vision. And
Right.
the world is like, not going to say against you, but a lot of it is going to be trying to really test your mettle, which
Oh
I don't
yeah.
think is against you, but more of like a higher good in a way. I don't
Yeah.
really believe in bad. I believe in higher goods. I don't believe in losses. I believe in lessons. So
Right.
it's just like warning to those out there. If you're going to start this, just like the beginning of the entrepreneurial roller coaster, be prepared to experience some stuff in your life that is not always going to be the easiest.
Oh
But
yeah.
if
Yeah.
you sit on it and you think about it, it's only going to make you that person that you are trying to achieve for your own goals, for your own sake. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
just take it all with a grain of salt. It's gonna
Yeah.
be
Absolutely. That's great that you brought that up, because that's a very important thing to be prepared for. I think, this is one of the things that I talk about. When we've talked about this in our Facebook group. I've done a video on YouTube for this as well, of the biggest mistakes I see people who get into the lead generation space, or really just starting any sort of a side business, is they're unprepared. Like, we all decide that we want to get into a side business, a side hustle, which I don't really like using the word side hustle. I like to use the word side business, because to me, that's, if you're going to start a side hustle, essentially it's a business. And anyway, I won't go into that too much right now, but like they start and they have this vision for like, oh, I can make some money doing this, and then they, start experiencing the drops, the twists, the turns, and that's honestly a lot of times what gets us unraveled is we think, or we desire for that vision to be created, not necessarily quickly but easily, right? There's this saying out there, the get rich quick scheme, right? I think that's actually kind of the wrong way to label it. The way I would label that is the get rich easy scheme. Like if somebody's pitching you on something that's like, here's a get rich easy thing, that's not really that true, because you actually can get rich quick if your definition of quick is 2 to 3 years. People have done it all the time, right? People have done it in shorter times, but they're kind of the anomaly. But there are a lot of people that put their head down for 24 to 36 months and literally are so consistent with what they're doing that they get rich. They make millions of dollars in 2 to 3 years, which, let's think 2 to 3 years ago, if we would have set out on something and achieved, millions and millions and millions of dollars, would we consider that quick? Like we would be like, yeah, that happened fast, right?
Quick,
And
man.
so anyways, it's, don't expect it to be easy. It can be quick. You can create your vision quick, as long as your definition of quick isn't like tomorrow, right? If it's like, if that's your definition of quick, then there's some crazy stuff that's going to need to happen. A lot of luck is going to need to go your way, right? But that is not the way that it happens.
Gonna
That's not the way that it happens for the majority of people. That's not the predictable way to achieve your vision. So yes, I'm glad that you brought that up. Is like, yes, we start with this vision, we get it as clear as possible, and as we start to act on it, that's when kind of that second portion that we talked about last week of the unicorn equation comes in, where it's like, okay, we consume some sort of content, knowledge, whatever, and then we go put that knowledge into practice. We come across an obstacle, and then we go back, and then we come across an obstacle, and then we go back, and back and forth, back and forth. And those obstacles sometimes suck. Like we think they're insurmountable, but they're not. Everything is figure outable. There's a way around or over every single obstacle that comes your way. It's just a matter of, do you have that fortitude to get through, and do you have a compelling enough vision for your life to drive you to want to get through that obstacle? Because I would argue that if you don't have a compelling enough vision, it makes it infinitely harder to get over those obstacles. And maybe if you feel like the obstacle isn't overcomable, it's not that the obstacle's not overcomable, it's that you don't want what's on the other side of it bad enough. Therefore your vision isn't compelling enough to get there, right? So there's so much that goes into it. And it's a lot of it is trial and error. A lot of it is it's gonna be crazy. The ride is gonna be crazy, but it's so worth it. Or I guess that's the whole point, is create a vision that's worth it enough for you to where it drives you through those hard times. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and anything done with practice, you get good at. So
Mhm.
for those out there, it might seem really intimidating to set up a really big vision and achieve it. It's intimidating for me still today, but I just said, whatever, let's try it. So, let's see what happens. That's where I'm
Yeah.
at.
Yeah.
Uh, but for those out there that are a bit more skeptical, with like, what's attainable, just start with little things. Little things,
Yeah.
painting. Painting is one of the easiest. It doesn't have to be a pretty painting, but just like set a vision, what you want to see, paint it.
Yeah.
Little things, and you would be really surprised. Just like everything can be practiced and improved on. You'd be really surprised how like just practicing painting and putting that vision
Right.
into a tangible thing can grow into like achieving greater things. Like
Right.
maybe physical health. Like okay, this is what I want to look like. How do I do it?
Yep.
I heard a quote somewhere. I forgot what it was. I don't even know if it was a quote or just like a piece of advice. It's like, the greater the vision, it's going to take a lot longer, obviously,
Yeah.
but,
Yeah.
for example, like Grant Cardone, you talk about him, he created a $5.5 million business in like 90 days.
Yeah. Yeah.
This guy's like done that. You know what I mean? He's had the skills. So he's like, no, his brain's automatically seeing these opportunities because he's practiced that manifesting. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It seemed really intimidating to like, rent out a trailer and like lease it on Airbnb and know guarantee to that person you will make the money back. But
Yeah.
with practice, little things, you will get better at this stuff.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Gosh, that's crazy. And you know, you talk about Grant. Grant's one of those guys that talks about how he like literally has a legal pad next to his bed. Every morning he wakes up and writes down his top 10 goals, his top 10 targets. What's he shooting for, right? And especially the ones that he hasn't attained yet. His top, I think, if I understand it right, he writes his number 1 down to his number 10. And you know, he might achieve number 10 or 9, and then he swaps them out with a new number 9 or 10 as he's working on the other ones, right? And you know, it's top of mind, top of mind, top of mind. A good story that I wanted to share on this is do you know who a guy named John Assaraf is? Have you heard that name before?
I've heard of Asaraf.
Okay. So um John Assaraf, whatever his name is, however you say his last name, he told a story on Ed Milet's podcast that just like blew me away. It's one of my favorite podcast episodes I've ever listened to. And I remember listening to it over and over and over again and sharing it with like everybody that I knew because it was just insane. So John, so a very brief lead up to the story is that he bought the rights to the Remax real estate in Indiana. I think it was either the whole state or maybe just Indianapolis, Indiana. And he tells a reporter on channel whatever news, you know, like the local news, that he's going to build a real estate agency that does over $1 billion in transactions a year. And you know, the reporter, she said something along the lines of like, well, you know that nobody, not even like the biggest real estate agencies in the nation have ever done that, right? And he said, I didn't know that, but like, I don't care. Like, that's what I'm gonna do, right? So that was like his vision, right? And so he finally, as long as I'm getting the story right, he finally built up an organization that did $1 billion worth of transactions in a year. And then, but that wasn't that was okay. That's one cool thing. But this is the really cool part is once they did that, he started looking at all of the agents that were in his organization, and he started seeing that all of the real estate agents that were making $100,000 a year, they were still making $100,000 a year. The ones that were making $50,000 a year were still making $50,000 a year. Like the only reason they actually achieved the $1 billion mark was because they added more agents. And so what he wanted to do was he was like, how do I get these people to get better results? Because that's more what I care about than just the organization getting bigger. And by a sheer volume and number standpoint, they're doing more revenue, right? So what they started doing is they started doing this belief work where they would take out a sheet of paper and they would write out, and the way he explains it is like a script for your life. You know, imagine, you know, you're Tom Hanks, or I think he uses the name Tom Hanks, Will Smith, whatever, some of the best, you know, actors, actresses. And imagine, you know, when they get a script for a part that they're playing in a movie or a show or whatever, they literally become the person on that script, right? And so what he said was, he's like, I started having people write out, you know, the attributes and the beliefs of the most, you know, attractive characters and you know, the people that they, you know, basically like I think he calls it like a script of greatness, or maybe that's what I call, I don't know, I have my own script of greatness that I've made for myself. But essentially it's, you know, once you've got this vision for what you want to create, and we're talking about now planning out the action steps and everything, is we need to write down who do we need to become in order to be the type of person, like in a script, to where we become that person. And what would they say and what would they do? And so what he had his agents do is they would write out, you know, I make, you know, X amount of sales calls. I did it, you know, so for each one that had like, okay, so let's say they're making 100 grand and they wanted to 10X that and become a millionaire in sales commissions of homes. Well, they would write out what type of a character or person and what character traits do they have, behaviors, all that kind of stuff would they need to be that type of person, as if it was like a movie, right? And so then they would do that, and then they would just practice the lines, right? They would practice the script every single day. They would write it out. So they would have their master copy once they've created it. of the type of person that they needed to become. And then they started writing out the script of, what kinds of words did they use, language did they use, what was their body language like, what was their thoughts and their behaviors and their habits and everything, right? And what they started doing was they started writing it out every day, and then they would read it back out to themselves while taking a finger and putting it over the words. So like you've got the sheet of paper here, and they're reading, like they're following along with their eyes as they're touching the words that they just wrote. And so they're engaging like all these different senses of their brains, right? They've got the kinesthetic of writing things down, they've got the visual, they've got the touch and everything. And they made it a point that they didn't want to hire any new agents. They just wanted to keep going with the number of agents that they had. And from that year that they did the billion to just focusing on that belief work, they went to 4 billion. They 4x'd their results, which is gnarly for someone who was told that they could never even achieve a billion. They did 4 times that by just everyone becoming more. And what they did to become more was they wrote the scripts of who they needed to become, and then they became those people. And that's another huge lesson that we hear in the personal development realm is like, don't make a goal for for just for the sake of achieving that goal. Like if I want to make a millionaire, it's like, no, make the goal or whatever for what it's going to make you become in order to be the type of person that makes $1 million, right? Because that's another thing that has to do with that thermostat that we talked about, where it's like, if you become the type of person that, makes $1 million, then that's when the millions just start showing up. That's when you start cranking up that thermostat and you actually start achieving higher levels. That's when all of a sudden now your thermostat's not going to kick on. Your AC is not going to kick on to cool yourself down, because your thermostat is now set at a higher degree of life. And anyways, that was just a really cool story that I've thought about often. I've written out my script of greatness. That was actually something that helped me lose a lot of weight. Oddly enough, most of my goals have always been around financial and business and stuff like that. But I set a goal last year that I wanted to lose 75 pounds. I came a little bit short. I lost 60 in the year, but it was still a lot. It was the most weight I had lost in a year's time. And it was because I wrote out a script of greatness of like, who I was, like the type of person, like, I don't snack if I'm not hungry. I don't eat after a certain time. I wrote out the type of person that would be someone 60 pounds lighter than myself or 75 pounds lighter than myself. And then I just tried to become that person. And ultimately by doing that, that's when I started seeing the results. Right. And so
Absolutely.
it's kind of this nuanced step after the vision that you've created for your life. Once you've got it clearly defined, now it's okay, how do we really step into becoming that? And that's what I really think the law of attraction, law of manifestation, all that kind of stuff is that it's becoming, planning out who you need to become, and then you figure out a way to become that person, as opposed to just sitting in your bed thinking, I want to be rich, and then hopefully it shows up, right?
Yeah,
So
I've gotten a lot of cynicism for that. People like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna have a wad of money appear in my pocket.
yeah,
There's a lot
yeah,
of
it's
cynics
like,
out there, man. But no, this is
yeah,
not gonna lie, man. This has honestly probably been one of the top 3 conversations I've ever had in my life. So,
dude, that's awesome, man. Glad to
man.
hear it. Glad to hear
So,
it.
but yeah, just like one more thing to maybe add to this. I don't know, probably pushing it a little bit.
Yeah, we
But
can wrap up here.
one more thing to add, is just like, and you can look this up. This is a fact for
Mhm.
anybody out there listening. Your subconscious mind, can't tell the difference between thought and physical reality. I don't know if you went to that UFD event with that one guy who's up on the stage. He's like, imagine a lemon in your hands.
Yeah,
This is all my coworkers, man. I get them
yeah,
all. The
yeah,
young people do it better because their imaginations are a bit more used more often. But
yeah,
yeah, you imagine a lemon in your hands, you bite it, really pretend there's a lemon in your hands and then bite it, you will get a sensation in your mouth because
yeah,
your subconscious mind, your reactive mind, can't tell the difference between thought and physical reality. So if you sit there and you choose what thoughts you want in your mind, I want to be this person. What would this person do? How do I achieve this? Even if it sounds delusional,
yeah,
your brain eventually makes it truth. your subconscious mind, the reactive thing, the thing that makes you get up and do certain things, whether it's something you want to do or something you enjoy doing. The
Yeah.
subconscious mind is it's
Oh, it's
man.
everything. It's everything, man.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't yeah,
Yeah,
well,
and for some people that just heard that, they may automatically go to this story, and I'm sure you've heard this story before, where there was a study done of a basketball team where half the team was given um, free throws. They needed to shoot X amount of free throws, like 100 free throws a day for a week or whatever, a month. I don't know how long the study was. And then the other half of the team wasn't allowed to physically shoot the balls, but they just imagined themselves, they closed their eyes and they visualized themselves making 100 free throws every day. And then when they went to go actually test who was better at shooting free throws, they were virtually exactly the same. And it shows that repetition and visualization in our minds, like, it's so powerful, because yeah, our brain literally doesn't know. That's why, like, when you're watching a scary movie, why your heart starts to race, because you think it's real. Right, you think that your mind is creating this thing where it's like, oh my gosh, this person's chasing me with a chainsaw or whatever, right? And that's not the case at all. It's in this like box, and that nothing can happen to you, or like, you should know that, but our brains like don't know the difference between reality or whatever. And another really good podcast that I heard on the same exact thing that explains this is on Ed Milet. Ed Milet has just awesome guests, and Tony Gonzalez is one of the best NFL tight ends that's ever happened, and he has his own podcast called Wide Open. Super cool. Talks about mental health challenges and stuff that he's had in his life and whatnot, which is cool coming from somebody that's like achieved what we consider to be so much success, and how he really opens up about mental health issues, and how it's a very real thing for everybody, not just a select few. But anyways, that wasn't the point of this podcast. This podcast, they were talking about, or Tony was talking about, how when he was playing in the NFL, what he would do the night before every game is he would sit at the end of his bed with his head like down in the blanket, like, so that he was like completely blacked out of anything, any light. And he would imagine what the grass was going to smell like on the field the next day. He would imagine the beads of sweat on his face. He would imagine the routes that he needed to run, and like catching the football on a bad throw, on a good throw, like all these different scenarios he would run through in his mind. And then, because Ed was asking him, like, how did it feel when you caught this pass that won whatever game or whatever, something that had happened. And he's like, it's interesting. That's when he told the story, is because he's like, it didn't feel weird to me at all, because it's like my mind already knew it was going to happen, because it had already ran through it. Right. And like, how powerful is that? Right. Like, even another guy that Ed had, I'm a big sports guy, and it comes in a lot with this whole goats and unicorns thing, but Michael Strahan he's an announcer now, but he used to be a defensive lineman for the New York Giants. And he was on the team that beat the New England Patriots when the New England Patriots were like literally unstoppable. Actually, I think they had gone, if I'm not mistaken, might be wrong, but I think this season the Patriots had gone undefeated, and then they had gone undefeated, obviously, all the way to the Super Bowl. So they didn't lose a single game in the regular season, didn't lose a single game in the playoffs, obviously, because they made it to Super Bowl. And the Giants like somehow randomly ended up in the Super Bowl. Like, it was like they weren't great or something. They were okay, but then they ended up just winning a lot of games in the playoffs. And Michael Strahan talks about something I think his dad said was like, they both just had this weird like feeling that like the Giants were going to win. And they were like, and Michael talks about how he's like, I had made it up in my mind that we had already won. All we had to do was then just go through the formality of going through the steps of the game to like actually win in real life. Right. So it's like this creation process. Right. And so those are just some examples. That might be a good place for us to stop for today. But yeah, it's so important to do these things, no matter how hokey it may sound. Like, buy into this stuff, because it is real. I've been the kind of guy before where it's like, this is stupid, or like this isn't for me, right? Just whatever story I was telling myself, right? Oh, the people who do that are just kind of, just rah, like, I can just get it through sheer grit and tenacity and hard work, and when somebody finally pulled me aside and was like, Zach, we all know people who work really hard and they aren't nearly as successful as other people. Why do you think that is? And it's like, because they're missing the other pieces, right? We talk, this comes full circle with the success triangle. You've got the beliefs, the actions, and the tactics. Well, we all know the people who work really hard, they've got the action steps, but they don't have the beliefs, like what we've been talking about, or the vision. And even if they have the right tactics, like even if you just have two, you're still ultimately not going to be as successful as if you can get on board with the beliefs, get on board with the vision, get on board with, thinking bigger than you think is practical. If you don't get on board with that, you're not going to achieve as much as you could otherwise. So it's so important to have all three parts of the success triangle, which we can obviously dive further deep into on another podcast, but
There is more to come.
there's more to come. Absolutely. Absolutely. So,
Well, anyways,
but
man, this has been an awesome start to my day. Like I was saying, I literally just woke up probably half an hour before we started this.
good deal. Yeah.
Talk,
Love it.
talked about some higher education. I think I'm going to have an awesome rest of my day.
Dude, great. Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in, and we will see you in the next episode.